Okay, so the topic of today's monologue here will be the Duluth model. Now, it's actually really scary that this model is the most widely used model by government agencies when it comes to domestic violence and determining whether or not domestic violence is taking place. Not only because it is blatantly sexist, and we're going to get into that. I mean, it's pretty obviously if you look at it as is, but more so that it's also very vague and open-ended. Many things that aren't domestic violence can be interpreted as domestic violence under this model. I could go down their FAQ on their website, and that in and of itself is pretty much a joke. Like the question, it says, does the Duluth model shame men? And they just blatantly say no, even though that's all it talks about is being abusers in this. Or why don't you use gender neutral language to describe domestic violence? And they'll say, well, it's 85% of men doing it. Well, gee, I wonder why that is when you're taking domestic violence as something only men do. Then, of course, you scroll down to the question, do women use violence as often as men in intimate relationships? Well, their first line is, well, yes, but it's in a different circumstances. It's somehow different. Yeah, they're totally not sexist. Start off with using coercion and threats. You notice how it's always her, as if it could never happen the other way around, or it's somehow different if it happens the other way around. Let's get to the one part I want to talk about mainly on this one, threatening to leave her. So basically, you're saying that that doesn't happen in any couple's relationship. You're saying if a guy puts his foot down and says, well, hey, you know what? If you're going to continue to act like this, or if you're going to do that, I'm just not going to stay with you. That's domestic violence. I mean, come on. Moving on to using intimidation. And again, the people who wrote this model obviously presume that either A, women don't do this, or B, it's somehow different when women do this. And again, there's a lot of open-endedness in this particular section as well. Making her afraid by using looks, actions, or gestures. Well, that's really open-ended, and it's really subject to interpretation on this. So I don't know what they're trying to get at with that. And the next segment is emotional abuse. Again, I'm being redundant on this one when I say, yes, it always mentions her, like she could never be the one to do it to him. But not only that, again, there's some of this stuff that's very much so open to interpretation. Sometimes couples like to poke fun at each other. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily consider that domestic violence. And I certainly wouldn't suggest that calling somebody a mean name would be domestic violence. It might be emotional abuse, but it's not domestic violence like beating the hell out of somebody. Using isolation. Now, this one also is very much so open-ended, open to interpretation. Understandably, when you're in an intimate relationship with somebody, they or you might not want them to see some ex-partners that they might have some feelings for out of a little bit of territorialness, and that's okay. Now, when it goes down to straight up isolating somebody and not letting them see their friends and stuff like that, well, yeah, that's not a very healthy relationship, but where do you draw the line between column A and column B? Minimizing, denying, and blaming. Okay, let's talk about the part where it says not taking her concerns about it seriously. All right, so what is it? I mean, is it somebody making an off-color joke, or maybe a little bit of a comment or a joke she took too seriously, now she's calling it abuse? Or is it no shit verbal abuse that he's not taking seriously? You see how open-ended this is, how open to interpretation it is. As for the denying portion of it, well, domestic abusers are always going to deny it, but guess what? So are innocent people. So are people who aren't domestic abusers. They're going to deny it too. So really, denying it is not necessarily a symptom of domestic violence so much as it's going to be something that everyone does no matter what the issue is. Using the children. Well, I find this one particularly funny being on the Duluth model because first off, in the vast majority of divorce cases, the state's automatically going to default to the mother for sole custody. I know in Texas, you can go to jail for not paying your child support, but if you fail to get the father their visitation rights, the state doesn't really do anything to you for it. Furthermore, the Duluth model wants to pretend that either A, women don't do this, or B, it's somehow different when the mother of the children does this. And I find that completely messed up. I find this double standard that the Duluth model is using just to be abhorrent, especially when it comes to the children in this one. And this next segment here, using male privilege. If you had any doubts in your mind about the sexism in this chart, that should be removed with this one right here. Let's start at the bottom here, societal privilege in general. Well, what societal privileges do men have, especially when it comes to divorce and domestic violence, that women don't have? I can't think of any. I mean, in fact, I could think of plenty of cases where women have been violent towards men and people laughed about it. People thought that was a funny joke. Do they consider it the same way if the situation's inverse? No, they don't. People consider that man a scumbag, for even laying his hands on a woman in anger. Let's look at divorce cases, and mainly child custody battles. Who by default, again, gets the custody of a child the vast majority of the time? Oh, that's right. It's usually the mother and not the father. Being the one to define men and women's roles. Well, that's funny because I've heard plenty of people say, well, that guy just needs to be the man of the house. That guy just needs to step up and be the man of the house. And I don't hear the people who made this stupid model come out and say, wait, guys, we shouldn't abuse men that way. Making all the big decisions. Well, that's really open-ended and up to interpretation. What if the guy gets a job that's much better paying to better support their family and they have to move for that? I would think that decision would be not so abusive. Treating her like a servant. Well, again, this is very open-ended. All right. At what point do you draw the line between treating her like a servant and expecting her to do her part in the relationship and keeping the house in order? Moreover, I have to ask, isn't it also abusive to treat the guy like a wallet, like their own personal money machine, their own personal ATM? Oh, wait, that's the next segment, using economic abuse. And again, this is very open-ended on this. Let's start off with preventing her from getting or keeping a job. Okay, yeah, that's pretty abusive to do to somebody. Now, the problems I've had with my ex-wife was actually getting her to get a job. And with that, I think it's quite very well possible that some women just don't get jobs because they expect their partner to work and they just say their husband won't let them get a job just to alleviate responsibility for them not getting a job. Making her ask for money, giving her an allowance. Okay, I fail to see how this is domestic violence or economic abuse. See, if the husband's a breadwinner and managing the finances, he needs to know where the money's going and how much money is going where. Likewise, if it's the wife that's the breadwinner and managing the finances, she needs to know where the money is going and how much of it is going where so she can balance the bills too. Moreover, would you really want to be filing your second or third bankruptcy just to say, well, at least I wasn't economically abusive to my spouse? I sure as hell know I wouldn't, and I would much rather take the reins of the bills and make sure the family is financially stable first. That's the best service you can do for your spouse. Taking her money, not letting her know about or have access to family income. I'm going to read that again. Taking her money, not letting her know about or have access to family income. I mean, I could be reading this wrong here, but it's almost like you're implying the money she makes at her job is her money, while the money the husband makes at his job is family income. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong on that one. However, if I'm not wrong in that assumption, well, that would mean the creators of the Duluth model are abusive, sexist hypocrites themselves. In fact, I get the feeling that people that wrote the Duluth model really have very little to say about domestic violence against men. And it seems to be a lot more acceptable in certain circumstances than against women. Take, for example, this cunt right here who thought a man getting his penis chopped off was absolutely fabulous. And to be fair, the show did issue an apology for that, to my understanding. However, it should also be noted that men do face domestic violence as well. I have been in relationships with a few abusive women before, and I can tell you it's not fun. It is a very miserable experience coming home to a person you care about who is supposed to care about you, and you're wondering whether or not they're going to start some crap that night. It is also a pretty miserable feeling when you have to fear that you might be the one going to jail for the domestic abuse that you didn't even commit. I think it's wrong for anybody to have to go through that or have to live their life in that manner. And when we play stupid political games with serious issues such as domestic violence, we generally tend to not help the situation out and, in fact, possibly make the situation worse. And with that being said, I want to hear what everyone else has to say. Y'all leave your comments. Thank you for watching. Y'all take her easy out there and have a great day.